And we are live. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. In today's episode, we have a very special guest that is coming to discuss with us a little bit about the war in Iran, Israel, United States, Iran, and also the UK. I'm going to introduce him and we're going to jump right in it. Mr. Andrew Fox is a former British Army major and a frontline conflict researcher, specializing in modern warfare, a former senior lecturer at the Royal Military Academy in Sandhurst. He is now a senior associate fellow of several international think tanks and a regular media commentator on global conflicts. I've seen many of his videos. I'm sure many of you have seen his video, especially in the beginning of this war, where he was giving a very unique insight into what is happening in Gaza, but not through the eye of a journalist or an influencer, but through the eye of someone who was a commander in the British Army and someone who's been stationed in several war zones, and he knows what he's talking about. So that's why it was very fascinating for someone like me, and I'm sure for many of you. He writes the Fox on War Substack and a co-host at the Brink podcast, bringing field reporting and strategic analysis from conflicts, including Gaza and Ukraine. Without further ado, Mr. Andrew, welcome to our show.
Thank you. Really great to be here. I appreciate it.
The honor is ours. The honor is ours. And I know Khalifa has been working very hard to get you on our show. And I can see he's eager to ask you some of the questions. So, Khalifa, the mic is yours.
Yeah, I'm more excited than eager. I really admire your work. And first of all, I want to start by saying thank you. Thank you for your service, all the service that you are doing. It's highly appreciated, and your voice is being heard here in Israel, and we highly appreciate it, especially in those times where, a lot of people yield to the bullies, intellectual bullies, rather than speak up their minds and speak the truth. And what I really love about your perspective is that it's not, a laboratory clean ideas that sounds maybe good in studios, but never met the reality. Your perspective was grown in dust and tears and blood and explosions. But the first thing that I'm interested about asking you, because me and Mansour were both veterans and served in the army in the IDF. But what I'm really curious about is, take me to the moments that you finished your training back in UK and you've sent about to be deployed, I don't know, in Afghanistan or Iraq, because for us, fighting is fighting on our homes here. And how do you feel it? Like, how do you perceive this kind of idea that I'm going to fight now in Afghanistan, a faraway country?
Well, my generation at Sandhurst, so I started in 2005, did some time in like the injury platoon as well, so I didn't commission until 2007. And everyone in my generation knew that we were either going to Iraq or Afghanistan. Like, there was no question, like everyone went. And I was actually guys who'd been in my original intake were getting killed in Afghanistan and Iraq whilst I was still in training. Like, I'll always remember John Bracho Cook. We used to sit next to each other in the Catholic chapel in Sandhurst for Sundays. He was killed in Iraq, and I went to his funeral in my training uniform, my Sandhurst blues. So wow. It was always a reality for us. Joe Dyer was killed in Iraq while I was still an officer cadet myself. So this was just our reality, and actually it happened even quicker for me than I expected, because I went to Afghanistan about a week after I finished training. It was literally that quick. We were finishing off our infantry course, and then we got the phone call: 5 of you, you're off to Afghanistan tomorrow, pack your bags. And so I was in my first firefight like maybe 2 weeks after I finished training. So it was just normal. You were into it, you were expecting it, your friends had all started going, and then all of a sudden you're there on the front line. And I think coming straight out of training made it easier, because everything was fresh. Like, all the drills you've been taught to that high standard you get in British infantry school. Like the infantry battle school in Brecon is really hard training, and you can go straight to the front line, apply all those skills you've just learned, and it feels natural, and you're just kind of into it. So it was a baptism of fire in some ways, but also it was just what my generation did. And the current generation going through kind of are a little bit jealous in some ways, because they don't have that trigger time, they don't have that chance to actually play the match. They do all the training, but they never get to play the game. And certainly the officer cadets I instructed at Sandhurst, certainly had a degree of kind of envy, and they wanted to go there. And my comment to them was always, just be careful what you wish for, because it's not a game.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a game. And you know what? As someone who was in the IDF, in the special forces, and an officer, I remember when I first realized that almost all of our training and combat doctrine, the foundation of it, was based on British Army, on the SAS and the British infantry. Literally, that's when I was in Vingate and I was doing a training to how to train my guys. And then I realized, wait a second, everything that we have as a foundation was taken from these great nation that had such a vast experience of combat and history, and in many ways also one of the nations that stopped Nazi Germany from conquering planet Earth. So you guys have a great history, and bringing it to now it looks like the UK is not getting as much combat experience as they used to getting before. And I know I'm opening maybe a topic that might be a bit sensitive, but I'm just trying to understand myself. Israel and America go and attack Iran. They have a clear agenda. Israel doesn't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon, so they can come and nuke Israel, and America realize that maybe they're getting too close to that, and also a sworn enemy of America and destabilizing the Middle East, and decide to go and wage a war. During that war, Iran launched a drone, if I understood, and it lands in a UK base in Cyprus. I don't think that this was coincidental. I don't think that this was a mistake. Must have had some kind of a target of different targets around the world, like, just click that button, shoot, piss off the UK, the British, piss off, I don't know what, different countries. And I'm kind of surprised by the response of the UK. It seems to me, at least what I'm seeing in the media, that they're trying to pull out, hey, we don't want to get involved here. We don't want to get involved here. This is not really our war, but we're going to let the Americans use our bases. Do you think the UK should actually take that more aggressively, or do you think that actually what they're doing right now by staying out of it is the right course of action?
Well, this is a long answer, so I'm going to try and break it down into chunks that we can maybe talk about, because there's a lot of geopolitical factors that come into play on this one particularly, and I don't think it's quite as simple as black and white. So the target in Cyprus to start with was the American targets. So I know that base intimately. My first posting in the army was Cyprus, so I know this Akrotiri really well. And the U2 spy plane flies out of Cyprus. That was the target, and that was actually what was hit. The hangar for the U2 was where the drone impacted. So they were certainly having a go at the American assets there, which to an extent, I'm not justifying the Iranians, but you can see their logic for targeting that. It's one of the big spy planes that gets up, floats around nearly on the borders of space. It's photographing everything below it. That's a big target for the Iranians. If I were Iranian, that's what I'd be shooting at, one of those things. So that's probably the first port to cover. Why haven't the British responded harder? Well, I think the drone itself came from Hezbollah rather than Iran. And striking in Lebanon is a very different beast for a European country. We're fighting a conflict on the European continent at the moment. The French are an important ally for us. The French have that kind of not ownership of Lebanon, but they certainly feel almost parental towards them, having been a former French colony. So that's very complicated on a European relationship perspective. Secondly, it's very difficult politically to do stuff alongside the Israelis. We've had those 2.5 years now of that non-stop propaganda that's been incredibly effective across Europe and America, to be fair. And that has created a very difficult political atmosphere to do anything alongside Israel. But then finally, I think the big question is, what do we actually add at this point? You've got 2 American carrier groups bombing Iran. You've got the might of the Israeli Air Force. You can get 200 ship sorties flying from Israel to Iran, bombing, and then hitting Hezbollah on the way back, which is quite remarkable. Like, what more could we do? What value can we realistically add here on the military perspective? And I think that will be factoring in as well.
But here is a question that it brought to my mind, and I would like to hear what you have to say about this. Given the circumstances of the UK right now and the demographics that you have in the UK, with the mass Islamic migration that have entered, it's no secret that it's changing the way that this country right now is. Basically, the future of the country right now is at the scale. Where is it going to go with that? If, let's say, the UK would have been attacked by Iran or by any other radical Muslim country, do you think the UK could actually go to war with that country, given the circumstance of what do they have right now at home and the loyalty of some of the people? Now, that's a dilemma that Israel had. Israel had that dilemma on October 7. What will happen when Hamas attacked and Hezbollah is attacking? What will happen with the Muslim communities that are living in Israel? Will they stand with us or will they join their Muslim brothers? Is that something that you think is concerning with the demographics of the UK and where is it moving right now? Or you think that any citizen of the UK sees himself first and foremost as I am British and then the others?
Look, the UK is 6% Muslim. Israel's what, 20%, I think?
Yeah.
And as well as I do that there are Muslims who serve in the IDF, and they do it with honor, and they're Israeli citizens. As well as I do also that there are Arabs inside, Muslims inside Israel who are not as friendly to perhaps the national identity as they might be. So this isn't a uniquely British problem, I don't think, and I think we probably reflect that. Yes, there is a distinct problem with recruiting for the armed forces, for example, from the Muslim community. That doesn't mean that we don't have Muslims who serve in our armed forces with as much distinction as Muslims serve in the IDF. There are, however, pockets around the country that are becoming homogeneously, how best to describe it, homogeneously non-white British. They are starting to coalesce around electoral coalitions, and they are, of course, the target for radicalization, and there are actors around the world who are going out of their way to try and radicalize these populations. And a symptom of that is what we've seen with the Gaza war over the last 2.5 years, where people have been radicalized. It's been very, very effective as an electoral issue to group Muslims around and get them voting for kind of slightly more extreme parties because they've been radicalized on the topic of Gaza. So there are problems here, but I think saying all of the 6% of our population who are Muslim are anti-British or are a problem, I think is oversimplistic. But I think we also have to acknowledge that there is a problem and it needs to be addressed as to why these people don't feel British and don't feel part of our society and are actively susceptible to radicalization. And these are the big questions that we need to grapple with. But in terms of going to war, I mean, I think if it were a genuine war of self-defense, say against Russia, I don't think we'd have much of a problem. The other factor, of course, is that the wider population is now heavily alienated after 20 years of disastrous interventionary wars in the Middle East and Southwest Asia, in Iraq, Afghanistan. Everything we've done since 2003 has turned to crap. Iraq, disaster; Libya, disaster; Syria, we made a mess of it; Afghanistan, of course, we spent 20 years and £1 billion plus to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. And I think there is a sort of war fatigue, particularly for wars of choice, that I don't think people get behind anymore. But if it's a war of national survival, I think we'd be okay.
Yeah, you mentioned one last question, Khalifa. You mentioned here the disaster of the regime changes and collapse of certain countries in the Middle East. What's your take on what's happening in Iran right now? I mean, we are witnessing, beyond any doubt, the fall of the Ayatollah regime. I will be very surprised if they don't fall. And I know this is a question that me and Khalifa and many are asking, what's going to be after? So what's your take about that? What might be after, or what would you like to see after that you think is going to be best for the Iranians, for the region, and etc.?
And I would like to add, before you answer, Andrew, just one thing to the question, because this is the direction that I was about to head, is strategically speaking, knowing what you know, seeing what you see, what is the play here for Iran? And just to link it to the previous question that Mansour asked, like, as I see it, Iran started by fighting itself, sending rockets and involving and disrupting the global economic system. and afterwards it activated its proxies like Hezbollah, for example. And now maybe there's a threat, probably even in the West, that I don't know, suicide bombers or jihadists will start activated by Tehran. So I would love your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the activation threat is a big one. And right now, that's the biggest Iranian threat to the UK. They may have intentions in due course to develop ballistic missiles that can strike the UK, but they're not there yet. So the security aspect is far and away the biggest Iranian threat to the UK. And we've already seen 4 arrests this week for Iranian-linked people who are targeting the Jewish community, actually. So the Met Police have made that, terrorism police have made those arrests. Our security services are exceptionally good. That's the reassuring thing for me. But unfortunately, as we well know, and as Israelis know better than anyone, the enemy only needs to be lucky once, and the security services need to be lucky every time. And that's a real concern, I think. And on that note, I think we can talk about Starmer in a minute, but I think one weakness we've had has been we've not prescribed the IRGC yet, where the EU has, America has, and a number of other countries have. We haven't done that action yet. We haven't prescribed individuals who own property. The Ayatollah still has an office in London, or whoever is the Ayatollah now. Iran still has an office in London.
That's crazy.
Kicked out. We've been really institutionally weak on that, and part of that is our Foreign Office. You've got weird ideas about British influence through diplomacy in Iran. But yeah, so we've not been anywhere near as strong on that as we ought to be and as we should be. So hopefully the government will get a grip of that next week. But yeah, going on to the question you were talking about Iran falling. Look, I think it's a little bit more complicated. Like, the regime headquarters have been taken out, but we have to remember that Iran's not built around a kind of cult of one man in the way that Iraq was, or Assad in Syria was, or Gaddafi in Libya, where it was one strong man keeping the country together. The regime is kind of both a regime and a revolutionary religious project. So it's ideological, it's institutional, it's multi-layered, and they've coup-proofed it. They've gone out of their way to try and reinforce it against these coups. The religious dimension, I think that means it can reach beyond Iran's borders. It's kind of got roots in Shia communities around the world. They've had a real focus on diaspora Shia communities, both in the Middle East, Iraq being a great example, and in America, in the UK, in Europe. But the coercive power for Iran is the IRGC, and they're not just an army; they're a parallel military economic empire almost, and their task is to protect the system. So they'll fight to the bitter end, and it's almost they've almost got this sponginess built in, where they're able to absorb the hits. They're like a sponge. You can keep pouring water onto it, and it'll just keep absorbing that water. So I think it'll be much harder to collapse the totality of the regime than maybe it would have been in Iraq or Syria or Libya. So I'm a little bit more reserved on the fact that it's definitely going to come to an end. And what next is the big question, and I think that's the $1,000,000 question. If I had an answer for you, I wouldn't be sat here talking to you guys. I'd be, a billionaire somewhere, because my prediction skills would be so good I could, win a fortune on gambling. And I think it goes a few ways. I think potentially the regime survives, badly damaged, and then goes on a spree to try and regain control. I think there's a balkanization option, which looks quite a lot like civil war, and has huge regional implications. So, you could have the Baluchis, you could have the Azeris, the Kurds. They could be armed, they could rise up, seize control of their little areas, which affects Iranian cohesion, which might then inspire people to rise up and take over their own areas. That's possible, but that brings in a bunch of other regional actors. So if the Azeris are a key player, then Azerbaijan will almost certainly get involved. If the Kurds are armed, the Turkish won't like that, and the Turkish might react in a way we don't like. The Pakistanis have had real problems with the Baluchis for a long time. I mean, they're already moving a Pakistani division to the border with Iran. We could see an area where they start biting things off, and that leads to a kind of balkanization across Iran, which isn't ideal. And I think the question we have to ask is it better than the regime staying in charge? Probably, for Israel's perspective. From a regional stability perspective, probably not. So the Gulf states won't like it. And so I think the reason it's so hard to predict is because there are all these regional factors, there are all these ethnic factors, and then there are competing priorities, because Israel's priority is Israel's safety, quite understandably. So they might want a different end state than the one Donald Trump wants, because the Americans aren't there out of the good of their hearts. They're there because they see an opportunity to have an Iran that faces towards America rather than towards China, combined with Venezuela and Cuba. That would give them 25% of China's oil that they have a massive control over, which gives them leverage in negotiations with China. So there's so much geopolitics at play here that I'm not going to make a prediction, but I can throw you out some of those examples as to what might happen. As a final point, I would just say it might go really, really well. There might be this wonderful turnover where some key leader like Pahlavi can come in and provide that leadership that leads Iran to a really great future. That's not off the table. But with the amount of complications that are around the region, it's going to be hard to achieve that, I think.
Yeah, but I think if we if we had to predict that it's not gonna end in 4 weeks, and that's a major thing. Like if I were in Iran's position, then I would say, okay, Trump said 4 weeks, then I will survive for 5 weeks and claim for a win here, and that's probably their strategy if I understand what they are doing. But knowing that you deal a lot with the Ukrainian front, so now in a blink of an eye, we have, I don't know, a dozen of countries involved in some way or another in this war. How do you think, what is the risk of us getting involved in escalating war that includes more and more countries?
Yeah, it's really difficult, isn't it? And we've seen, look at who's been taking strays from Iran. We've had Georgia, Azerbaijan, Turkey. They're trying to hit everything they can. And globally, the big problem with this war is going to be a massive inflationary surge. 20%, 20 to 25% of the world's gas and oil goes through the Straits of Hormuz. We live in a petrochemical world. And you don't need to be an economist to work out what happens in a petrochemical world if 20% of the supply gets cut off. It's going to massively increase demand, massively increase prices. And that could make this war very unpopular very, very quickly when you suddenly find, if you're in America, you find gas above $3, $3 a gallon, or you suddenly find yourself paying a lot more at the supermarket because of this war that's going on the other side of the world. That could, and this is an election year for the Americans as well. So that could play. Look at Russia, they were really starting to crack. The sanctions were really biting. The Ukrainians are hitting the shadow fleets. And yet, just this week, the surge in barrel pricing for oil has effectively given Putin everything he needs to keep going financially. On top of that, Trump has allowed sanctioned Russian oil to be delivered to India to try and offset some of the financial shock that's going to come in a week or two if this war keeps going. So the economics of this war are not great, and that's before we get to the damage that's been done to Gulf state oil refineries and other infrastructure. We've seen hits on Aramco in Saudi Arabia, Bapco in Bahrain. The Qataris have taken a hit, and then just today, the Iranian oil facilities are now on fire. So even if this war ends tomorrow and Iran comes back into the world and they have an oil supply to give, they've got to repair all the damage that's been done to them as well. So economically, this is potentially huge. And Russia, unfortunately, is a beneficiary, which is going to make life much harder for us in Europe, which is probably another reason why we're staying out of the Middle East, because we're really worried about Russia and we can't be sending aircraft carriers to the Gulf when we might need them for the North Sea. So again, incredibly complex geopolitics, and it's not just as simple as, remove Iran, carry on going.
Yeah, well,
Andrew, I have a question to you. As a former soldier to former soldiers, for me, it's just so clear why we need to stop Iran from having a nuclear weapon. Like, I have literally no doubt about it. You don't want these maniacs to have, religious fanatics to have a nuclear bomb in their hand. And once they will, God forbid, it's going to be a different world. But then I come and I see European countries and I see how much they're, opposing Israel and standing against Israel. And I'm just wondering, like, you guys want to see Iran having a nuclear weapon? Are the people in the UK even aware that this is, on the scale here? Because it seems to me, again, from what we're hearing in the media and what we're seeing, with your current leadership right now, that they're tending to always go against Israel and maybe a bit apologetic and trying to protect these, regimes. And it's just, I mean, let's call for what it is. Who are you protecting? So I don't know. Like, do you guys see it the same like we do? Like, do you guys see the urgency that we see in terms of stopping this Ayatollah IRCG regime from having a nuclear weapon? Or is it just only us, the Israelis, being like the Night Watch in Game of Thrones and all the others just playing the House of Game of Thrones house games and I don't know what, and just leaving us to guard the wall for humanity? That's how we see it in Israel, at least. I don't know if the rest see it that way.
I'm just thinking of that meme from Game of Thrones of Jon Snow with his sword, and that's Israel against the oncoming hordes. I like
that
it.
Is.
But yeah, look, it doesn't have the intimacy for the UK. Like it focuses Israelis' minds when you are surrounded on 6th of October 2023 with 7 countries that are armed and primed to try and destroy you. Like that focuses the mind. When it's in the Gulf and you don't pay that much attention to Gulf affairs because you have a job and kids to get to school and a mortgage to pay, and it's just another war in the Middle East on your page, on your newspaper pages, you probably don't take that much attention. And Iran are bad, and we've had things like the embassy siege in London back in the 80s that sort of sits in our cultural memory a little bit. But certainly the younger generation, they don't know that. And of course they've been bombarded with 2 years of Israel bad propaganda. And it's a logical step then. If you've been brainwashed to think Israel are bad, if somebody is opposed to Israel, then surely they can't be that bad, right? I can see how that logic works. This is tied to a really common mistake that we make in Europe and in the West generally, where you don't understand the opponent's psychology. And I went away and I did a psychology master's degree because I was just really interested in that aspect of warfare. Like, I think if you can understand the people, you'll understand the war better. So I deliberately went and got myself a degree in it because I thought it would enhance my job. And people look at two sides having nukes, and there's the nuclear peace argument. Like, the reason India versus Pakistan hasn't escalated to all-out war is because they are both nuclear. The reason the Cold War never escalated to full war is because there were 2 nuclear arsenals on either side. And people might fall into the trap of going, well, if Iran has a nuke and Israel has a nuke, surely that will actually make things more peaceful. And of course, the mistake there is the psychology, because the Iranians are religiously motivated. They don't think like we do. And if they had a nuke, they would use it. That's the difference. I mean, great examples of the psychology. We've seen it just this week. Like, if you had a bunker underground that took 5 minutes to get to in an elevator or a lift, and you had 2 American carrier groups parked on your doorstep, and you knew that last time, the summer before, when negotiations had failed, you were hit the very next day, would you go up to the surface and have a meeting with all your key commanders in 3 different locations that can be easily struck? Of course you wouldn't. It makes no sense. And the Iranians aren't stupid. They've got a great education system. They can train their own nuclear scientists. This is not a nation of idiots. It's a nation of people who just don't think like we do, and they're these religious fanatics. And that's why they keep making these, to us, mistakes time and time again. It's because their brains are not working the way our brains would work. And that's the mistake with nukes. Like, it won't be a nuke peace. Iran would do it because they believe it's destroy Israel.
No, exactly. I agree. I think a lot of people, I live in Germany, and I think a lot of people here just genuinely don't understand what it means, religious fanatic Muslims in the Middle East. You just don't know what it means. They might even not know what it means, religious fanatics. So we're talking right now about fanatics in Islam and the way that they see the world. They just don't know. And they try to always understand it through their own eyes as a Westerner who have a job, who have a family, who have hobbies, and who want to, save for the next vacation. And they don't understand that some of these people just really genuinely want to see the world burn down. and they believe that that's when the Messiah will come, or the salvation. And if they nuke Israel, that's when the expansion of the Muslim Ummah will start, and later on they'll be able to take Europe and America. They just really refuse to understand that there's something like that because they just haven't been exposed to it.
And it's so alien as well. So alien, isn't it? And if you look at part of the problem with Gaza, people cannot understand that Hamas fighters would gather their families around them and wait for them to be killed so that they could then get PR gains off their families' deaths. Like, it's monstrous for us. Like, you cannot conceive that somebody would do that. And yet Hamas fighters did that time and time and time and time again. And people just think that it's Israel killing families for fun. And it's all the psychology.
We should mention that before we start the recording, Andrew just said that he refused to get interviewed in a Piers Morgan show. And I think that's a good idea to something to talk about, knowing that this notion is unconceivable for the common British person. So if you can say a few words why you didn't agree to go on Piers Morgan.
It's one of the biggest shows in the world. Like, why would you say no to that?
It is because I have both self-respect and principles, I think, is the bottom line. And I'm not trying to chase clout. Look, Morgan has profiled some of the world's worst anti-Semites and has been unapologetic about it. And as someone who's taken a bit of a stand against anti-Semitism for 2.5 years, I don't think it would be appropriate for me to kind of dignify the garbage that he's put out for 2 years. By taking part in it, you almost justify it and you almost give it the credibility that it frankly doesn't deserve. And I just don't think that Morgan is a fair interlocutor. He's not a fair interviewer. He's not someone who is out there for to try and find the truth, to ask questions, to get to the bottom of issues. He's there to try and generate viral clicks. And that's just not a game I want to play. So yeah, no to Piers Morgan, yes to you guys.
Wow, Khalifa, I'm feeling very honored here, man. We just got someone just said no to Piers and yes to us. So I mean, what does that mean about us? But you know what? I agree with you very much, because I've seen Piers do that, and I've seen Tucker do that, and others right now. I'm just asking question. And to me, that's equivalent to, let's say you have right now a sexual assault case, and you have the victim, let's just say, in this case, a female, and then you have the male. And then you know that this male is accused, and you know actually that he did it because there's literally evidence that he's been doing it. And then you invite both of them and you give them equal side to come and share their voice around the world. But you know that this guy is literally the perpetrator. You know that he did these things. So you do it once, you do it twice, you do it 3 times. So I think, like, come on, man. Why are you platforming the aggressors and giving them such, knowing that they have such a huge crowd? So he does know what is happening. It's beyond any doubt. What is Iran doing? Beyond any doubt, what is Hamas doing, and what's their nature? And to come and always, put some of the biggest anti-Semites and biggest terrorist supporters out there and give them a mic, also knowing that we, the Israelis, we're a minority. We're the Druze, we're even a smaller minority. Like, there's only like less than 2 million of us on planet Earth. So whenever you platform, and then he never platformed us, but whenever platform people that are killing our people, then you're just letting them speak to their wider audience out there that already hates. So I think it's not very innocent what he's doing. I really appreciate and respect, your stand against that. That's quite rare today to see someone standing for these things. But I want to ask you a question, because you mentioned before Turkey, and Turkey is an interesting country. Very interesting country, and I think it's a bit shifting. Like, what's your thought about Turkey in all of what's happening right now?
Well, Turkey's gone on a really worrying journey from its initial days, where it had a good secular liberal democracy, and it's been on a bit of a journey to radicalization ever since Erdogan took over. Huge Muslim Brotherhood kind of infiltration, and I think Erdogan is looking to recover Ottoman influence. I think that's the long-term goal for him, in the same way that Putin is looking to recover Soviet influence. I'm concerned about Turkey because we've seen the removal of Iranian influence from huge parts of that belt of the northern Levant, specifically Syria. The Turkish have stepped in and filled that void. If we look at particularly how Syria is going, it's almost certain that the ISIS fighters are going to be, the ones who haven't been exported to Iraq. There's a high chance that they might return to circulation. Israel has very sensibly, I think, kept that buffer zone around Mount Hermon, where they've stepped in deliberately to try and help the Druze community that was getting massacred down there around Sueda. And I think that is a symptom that Israel knows that if you look at that flat plain, when you stand on the mount, not on the mountain, you look down, there's that flat plain into Syria where the buffer zone is. That is a dagger pointing straight towards Israel's heart if the jihadis can just pour across that border. So I think Israel's stuck defending that section now for certainly the near future. But Turkey do have ambitions. I think they managed to do well to keep them out of Gaza. Hamas has been not a client of Turkey necessarily, but certainly an ally of Turkey. And we know there's certainly stories of Hamas fighters who've been wounded in Gaza being smuggled to Turkey for treatment. They're not a friend to Israel. They do have territorial ambitions, and it's definitely something that, as an analyst, personally, I'm definitely watching that quite closely.
Our former Prime Minister Bennett, and including others in Israel, are starting to say that Turkey seems to be emerging as the next Iran, in the way that they're trying to. Iran had Hezbollah as their proxies and the Houthis, and other Turkey seems to right now investing in making Syria as their proxies and taking the lead on trying to unite the Middle East under, a Muslim Caliphate and, take the crusade against Israel. Because it seems like every time one of them want to get a name for himself, Israel is the first target that they want to eliminate off the map, and then later on Europe and America. So I'm just wondering how realistic is that? Is Turkey really trying to go that road, or are they gonna wake up and say, listen, what's happening? Because Turkey is a beautiful country. We have beautiful people in it, and also it's a very strong country, very capable country. And I don't think that going down that path is going to be good for Turkey or anyone in that region. But in Israel, people are literally showing concern. Watching right now, they're starting to call Turkey is going to be the new Iran. What's your thought about that? Do you think Turkey is going that direction, or do you think that's just kind of the fear right now of what's happening?
No, I think we need to be careful with our terminology. They're not governed by psychotic jihadis. They're not governed by this weird cult that has its belief in the Mahdi coming back and Israel being destroyed and then America being destroyed. They're not they don't have that level of religious motivation. They do have a sort of Muslim Brotherhood ethos, which is slowly, where you gradually expand your influence, not by force where you can avoid it, but by taking over the institutions and having political change from the ground up. And that's what Erdogan, I think, is trying to force in Turkey itself. We saw an attempted coup, must have been 2015, was it? Operations in Bosnia in 2018, and we had Turkish troops there, and they had almost no officers because they'd all been purged after that attempted coup. So that was kind of interesting to see the effects firsthand. So there's that very vice-like control that Erdogan is exerting over the country, and we've seen some of his rivals getting nobbled, having their degrees revoked from their universities, and some really underhand unpleasantness to keep that vice-like grip on the state. When it comes to expansion, I think we're going to see. I do agree that I think we're going to see some sort of proxy methodology behind this, because it's a really cheap and easy way to do it. It's great if you can get this done without your own troops being committed, because it gives you certainly a degree of plausible deniability. It gives you, it's like they used to say that Iran would bleed for the last Arab. They were quite happy to let their Arab proxies take the hits for them. So it makes sense as a strategy. It's a proven one that works. And being Muslim Brotherhood, I think my final point here is that they will think long game. They don't think in electoral cycles. They think in generations, in the same way that Hamas does, in the same way that the Qataris do. And that's the real danger, is that you take your eye off the ball because you're working in Israeli electoral cycles as a democracy. And next thing you know, they've crept up on your borders because you've been looking at something else. 7th of October is a great example. Israel was looking at other stuff and took their eye off Hamas, and here we are.
Yeah, and probably they're already working on it. They have sorry, huge presence in Libya where there's a lot of oil, and they are heavily invested now in Somalia, where they found like a $3 trillion gas inventory, and they're trying to close on Israel from different parts, and we can see this this maneuver being acted. But since you mentioned, and if I need to put a title to the war that we are doing right now, is cleaning the mess that you did in Sykes-Picot, because Benjamin Netanyahu, our prime minister, said in October 8th that we are changing the face of the map in the Middle East. And since you mentioned the massacre in the Druze in south of Syria, now we have huge displacement and evacuation of south of Lebanon, and places like Idahia, 1,500,000 large population of Shia. Are we seeing now any kind of transfer? What do you think, if you had to advise to Netanyahu? What can we do, like in south of Syria, south of Lebanon? How would you draw the map, in other words?
I think Israel's doing all it can, without committing to yet another military campaign that I don't think is justified at this point, quite frankly. I think Israel's got bigger priorities, and there's not enough there yet to justify a kind of much bigger military campaign than you've already got. I think we saw something useful during the sort of when the Druze were being attacked, and that was that Israel was able to get it to stop. That is useful. The new Syrian government are still trying to control the whole country. We've seen that with the Kurds in the northeast just recently, where they've been heavily negotiating and fighting to try and work out how to bring them into Syria as part of the country. So that tenuous hold that they have in Damascus means they're very vulnerable to a strike. And one of the things that really slowed down the rate of attacks in the south of Syria was that strike on the Ministry of Defense in Damascus. So Israel was able to have a really clear strategic effect with tactical action, and that's really important that Israel has that position. Then they've got that buffer zone where they have been able to extend a bit of protection around the Druze communities. They've created a field hospital so that the Druze Syrians don't have to risk going to Damascus to hospital and getting attacked on the way. They've got that field hospital down there, and they are facilitating aid. Probably not enough. More needs to go in. And actually, I came away really pissed off in January because I was down in the Civil Military Cooperation Center in Kiryat Gat, which is for Gaza, and I saw the amount of aid that was going in, staggering quantities of aid. And the day before, I'd been up with the Druze in the northeast of Israel, and I'd seen how much they were struggling to get aid into Syria, and like the difference between the two. I came away quite annoyed at the injustice of that, actually. But in terms of what else Israel can do right now, not a huge amount. Other fish to fry, bigger problems, and it's a situation that needs to be monitored rather than immediate action, I suspect.
You're muted, Mansour.
I don't believe in being muted. So, that's something that definitely bothered us a lot in Israel, where we said we have our Druze brothers and sisters, allies, Christians, and others in Syria that needs our help. And no one can send them food because they're being sieged right now by Al-Qaeda-like, ISIS-like, Jawlani-like, forces. Meanwhile, in Gaza, we have our enemy who came to destroy us, and we're sending them food, and they're stealing the food from their own people, and we're getting all the blame for it. That was quite, annoying. But I wanna put you a little bit on the spot here, if that's like something you can say, and ask you some personal questions, because I would really be genuinely interested to hear what you think. What would you say is the things that worries you the most right now about Europe, giving the current stance right now, what's happening around the world? Like, if you'd have to say that is something that I'm just really worried and that they're just not seeing it, what would that be?
I think it's the need for defense build-up, and bureaucracy is choking that off right now. So the EU, for example, has procurement rules that say you have to offer contracts around all EU countries. Everyone has to bid for it, and you have to go with the lowest bidder. And they've got all this kind of bureaucracy that makes it very difficult to actually procure anything. It's really hard to make military equipment in Europe because of the stupid EU rules that surround it. Likewise, when it comes to just the countries coordinating, they almost hit paralysis because you've got the EU trying to coordinate stuff, but you've got 27 countries with 27 different agendas. Each country trying to get the best deal for their own country within the EU system. And so you've got that constant competition between the EU trying to make rules and nation states within it still trying to carve out their own national interests. And what it means is we're just not taking this stuff seriously enough. Like, we should be saying, cool, we've got Russia boiling on our borders. The Middle East is still unstable. America has gone soft on Europe. Like, we need to take ownership of this. And we have the budget, and that's the stupid thing. Like, the UK's got the 5th biggest military budget in the world, and we can't get a carrier group out of the door because we don't have enough ships. This isn't because we don't have the money; it's because we're spending it stupidly. And our politicians just aren't taking it seriously. Like, our defense budget is way bigger than Israel's, and we can't field 1/10 of the aircraft that you can. It's ridiculous. So that's what really bothers me about Europe right now, is they're just not taking defense seriously, and they're choking it with bureaucracy when they need to be showing action.
Do you think, we talked about Europe, do you think the UK is anywhere remotely even ready for, if God forbid we're going to end up right now to a catastrophe, world war or something with Russia? Is the UK even remotely ready to actually face something like that?
No, we're not. Certainly missile defenses are a real problem. We're nowhere near where we need to be on that. Look, this is how underprepared we are. The Gulf states fired more Patriot missiles in the last week than Ukraine has fired in the entire war, because we've struggled to get Patriots to Ukraine. And, I was in Ukraine just last week, and
Wow.
there were 800 ballistic missile and drones fired at Ukraine whilst I was there in 2 days. Like, they are getting hammered every single night, and they have been for years, and yet we haven't been able to get our shit enough together to get them Patriot missiles that they need. That's a really great example of how underprepared we are. Now, Europe as a whole, we have more tanks, more planes, more soldiers than America does. And again, it goes back to that problem I was talking earlier. We're just really, really bad at coordinating it together and getting all our kind of moving parts traveling in the same direction. This shouldn't be beyond the wit of man, but I suspect it's going to take some sort of catastrophe before we actually focus on the problems that really matter. And that's my biggest concern on that front.
I think Europe got too comfortable thinking that America will come and save it and fight its wars, that they literally forgot that they need to be ready. And with all due respect to Europe, and I'm living here and I love Europe, but guys, a house that can't take care of himself and just count on the neighbor to come and save him is doing a dire mistake. Because what if the neighbor one day chooses that he doesn't want to come and help you? What if he starts fighting another one that is trying to invade his house, and you're stuck on yourself because someone won't come to your house? I mean, it's so bizarre to me that Europe don't have even the urge and the need to think like, oh, we should be able to defend ourselves. Maybe now they're waking up a little bit, but it's just really, really weird to me that they're not waking up. Khalifa, you wanted to ask something? Because I have so many questions for this guy.
Yeah. Well, and just because he touched base on the economical side of things, when I started my podcast 4 years ago, just for you to know my job and what do I do, I start conjecturing that there's a probability that we are heading towards a major war, and I made this conclusion by 2 symptoms, basically, that we have huge inflation and anti-Semitism. For me, those 2 signs are like big signs that takes me back to what happened in Germany in the 40s. So the thing is, we having this thing, just to put people, sorry if I'm taking too much of your time, but just to give you where I'm standing at, that in the 20s, Germany signed on a treaty, and that They needed to pay, for the UK and France the payment for the war, and they couldn't. They tried to do it by printing money and inflating things. And in the 1929, the US gave a huge loan to Germany that led the US to the Great Depression and somehow managed Germany to get out of this situation. But now we are facing a situation where we have global inflation, and it's a race to the bottom in a way. You have in Turkey, in Germany, in France, all those countries, in the US. And the dangerous thing about this thing that it creates an emergency state that somehow feeds itself, like it's trying to put off a fire by putting gasoline on it. You need more public spending, more public spending. You need emergency state. You need war, and then you'll have this dynamics of ongoing war. Just to put it like, because you mentioned the economical side of things. So how much do you agree with this, and how do you think is there a chance, knowing that more countries will put in like will step into the war?
Um, it's a tough one. Look, from an inflationary perspective, my biggest concern is genuinely the next 2 weeks. What happens with the oil prices, and what happens with oil supply? And in terms of spending, if I could just clarify your question slightly, are you talking about how to increase defense expenditure, or I wasn't quite clear where
Yeah,
you're going.
because now you're saying that the defense department in the UK is not so effective, and then they will say, "Hey, we're not ready now. We need those patriots. We need this. We need to print more money to get more weapons. And once you have more weapons, the chances of escalating war just will go higher."
Yeah, well, look, we spend 60 billion a year in the UK on defence, and that includes our nuclear budget. It includes pensions as well. And a really good example of why this money, we don't need more money. We just need to spend it better. Like, we are the fifth biggest defence budget in the world. Like, there is no excuse for our armed forces not to have a deployable armoured division, or not to have enough ships. Like, the money's there. The great example is the Ajax tank. We've spent billions on that. We started it, I think, in 2015. We still don't have the tank, and what ones we have are so bad they make soldiers sick from vibration when they're driving around in them. So I think they're probably about to junk that contract after having spent absolutely billions and no tank at the end of it. It's madness how we've done procurement so badly. I mean, to be a little bit kinder, like, we are still recovering from the 2008 financial shock. That really hurt us. We had massive cuts in 2010 to try and make the country's debt under control. It didn't particularly work, but it did strip out our armed forces. And then on top of that, during the years of Afghanistan and Iraq, defense was spending money like a fire hose, and our treasury didn't see a bang for buck, quite frankly. That two disastrous wars. The army didn't do particularly well at a command level. Our plans were bad. Our successes were limited, and then both campaigns ended in failure. So the treasury is very, very anti-defense spending, while there's no obvious tangible threat to the UK's sovereignty right now, because there isn't. Like, Russia are not going to be pouring tanks across the channel tomorrow. Iran is not going to be firing a nuclear weapon at us tomorrow. They might, however, in years' time. But I think the treasury think they can kick that can down the road and fund it when the time comes, when, of course, it will already be too late, and we'll be back in 1940, where the British Army gets spanked at Dunkirk and then has to spend a number of years recovering. We haven't learned from history, and we haven't understood the new world that we've moved into, I think. So yeah, all kinds of problems with UK defence, and we could be here the rest of the night talking about how badly we spent our money.
Well, you know what? I want to take your military expertise right now back to the fields in Iran. As someone who comes from the military, what is your impression of this war between the U.S. and Israel against Iran? This assault, this attack. Were you impressed by anything? Were you surprised by anything? What's your take on what you've seen so far?
It's a great question, and I think the operational surprise was a masterpiece. That first day strike that took out all of the leadership. I mean, that's hard to do. I mean, there's so many moving parts to pull together there. You have to get the intelligence right. You have to have the planes trained, ready to go, the orders delivered. You have to coordinate the movement of these, tens of aircraft through the air so they arrive at the right time and they can launch the missiles. And really, really impressive bit of planning. I think the plan generally looks sensible in terms of the targets they're striking. So they started with the leadership, they moved to the rockets, and the critical thing was getting that launch rate down from the Iranians, because otherwise the Gulf states were going to run out of missile defenses really quick. I crunched the numbers from what was publicly available, and I gave the UAE 7 days at day one missile fire rates. Obviously, getting that down was vital, and that has worked in terms of saving lives in the Gulf states. Israel obviously much better off than them, so they were the real worry for me, because Israel's used to getting missiles their way and they're ready for it. The Gulf states not so. The big concern for me, though, is where it ends. Like, where's your end state here? And that's the fatal flaw in so many military campaigns, is not having that clearly defined, this is where we stop. And we saw that in Iraq, Afghanistan. That's how we got dragged into multi-year quagmires. And I think if you set your strategic aims as taking out the leadership, stopping a nuke, destroying the missile capability, because that's what the Americans are saying, remember, they're not saying regime change, then I think you're okay. I think if you go for full regime change, doing that without ground forces will be incredibly challenging. You can try and generate ground forces from the regional groupings around Iran and get the Iranian people to do it. Like, that might work. I'm not saying it won't, but it does come with its own set of challenges that we already talked about. So going for full regime change, really, really difficult. How does it end? That's my one concern. But the fact that you've achieved complete air superiority over Iran, no surprise. Israel did it on their own last summer. They were always going to do it when they've got two US carrier groups worth of aircraft with them, and all the extra technological capability that comes with that as well. And yeah, I think there's a very impressive air campaign so far. Just what do you do next? That's the big question.
Yeah, I think that the question, if you will have boots on the ground, is no longer relevant. You must have boots on the ground, at least at the Hormuz part. So, if mayhem starts, you can't allow yourself them, to send bombs or whatever whatsoever on Hormuz.
They're taking the Kurds. Yeah, they're taking the Kurds. From what we're hearing right now, it seems like they're arming the Kurds again.
It's a different place. It is a different area. They can't reach it.
I know, but they're looking for boots on the ground, and like right now, looks like they're trying to see if the Kurds can fill that gap, because they want to go in and go at them. But I think, just like you said here, Andrew, this war cannot. It's one of the first things they teach you in the army, that wars are won when the infantry comes, throws a grenade inside the bunker, and put the flag. That's how wars are won. Doesn't matter how much airplanes you have and how much AI and drones. With the end of the day, it's that tank and it's that soldier and that's boot on the ground. And that is something that I completely understand why Israel would not want to send their soldiers to Iran, and why the US. But everybody wants Iran to have a better future and the regime completely to change. But are we really willing to go all the way for that or not? I think that is definitely the $1 million question. And I couldn't hope for more. I couldn't hope for like a better future for the Iranians. But, just by hoping and ignoring the challenges, I think people like us don't really have the luxury to just kind of hope. We're very realistic, and we're kind of looking around and just, it's very, very challenging, the situation there. I don't know how it's going to end, man. It's
nobody knows.
Not even me.
That's a good time, I guess, to tell everybody listening or seeing this. None of us know what's gonna happen a minute from now. We only discuss what we see and how we saw it, and probably to have a better understanding of things. That's all.
No, but here's the thing. Bibi Netanyahu, I was just reading it here. I was looking at the news. Bibi Netanyahu attacked the leaders of the West. That's from the Hebrew news. and for not helping the Iranian people, not standing beside them, and then went around to the Iranian people and told them the moment of truth, the truth is coming very close. Report, go and reclaim back your country. So how much of that is an irresponsible thing to call the Iranian people just to go and they will end up becoming, just butchered and slaughtered? How much is that is actually America and the US are really planning? I'm here to ask these hard questions, even as an Israeli, and I stand behind my country, but I do feel like the Iranian people had the promise given to them a few weeks ago that might have been a bit irresponsible of how it was said. And I very support, what Donald Trump did here with his, military going around and trying to stop the massacre. But the way it was said is go to the streets, and then they went to the streets, and then they got slaughtered because they had no guns. Because there were just students and beautiful women that just wanted to not wear a hijab and be free, but they ran and they were faced, and tens of thousands were slaughtered. And the question is right now, is there any end game here? And I think that the entire West should unite behind an end game here where we free countries like that, because to think only it's oppressing their own people is a mistake. This oppression is going to reach you. It's going to reach the UK. It's going to reach America. These jihadists, these radicals, and if you don't stop it, you know what? Here's something for you. Here's something. As someone from the UK, do you remember hearing that when the UAE, I think, made an announcement that they are stopping to send students or sponsor students to go to the UK because they're afraid that they will get radicalized as Muslims and then come back to them? Have you read that?
I have, and I'm a little bit skeptical. The UAE have been very strange for the last year almost. They've been super anti-UK. And I'm still struggling to understand why, if I'm honest. There's got to be some sort of political motivation. They've got their state-backed influencer squad like Amjad Taha and all these guys who've just been relentlessly anti-UK for the last few days. I don't know if it's because they're trying to draw more people from UAE and they're trying to say how much better the UAE is. I don't know if it's because they see an opportunity to strengthen their own brand at our expense. I don't know. I'm not really interested in anything Sharia countries have to tell me. Be a democracy, let your people vote, and then we can have a discussion. But I'm really not interested in being lectured on anything by the Gulf states, quite frankly. They're all autocracies. They're all corrupt. Like, I know for a fact that the UAE were letting Iran launder money to Hezbollah through UAE banking system. I don't take lectures from them, quite frankly.
No, fair enough. As someone who's coming from the Middle East and I've seen Sharia from very close, I can definitely understand why someone from the West will be wise like you to come and say, sorry guys, don't give me any advice. So, sort your own cow poo, first of all. Fair enough.
The UAE is the second largest partner, economical partner for Iran. They are serious.
Yeah. They're doing what all Gulf states do and playing all sides at once. They say one thing in public, one thing in private. They say one thing to one person, another thing to the other. It's what the Gulf states do. It's nothing new at all.
Yeah. Well, you know what, Andrew, we've taken a lot of your time and it's been about 1 hour here. And I know you're a very busy man. And, just before the show, we heard you on the phone talking to different media outlets that want to interview. So we're very, very honorable for having you on our show. Me and Khalifa, we've been waiting for a very long time, especially now when we heard that you said no to Piers Morgan and came to us. So even better. Ching ching. But one last question that I want to maybe ask you, and then we can, finish with that. As someone who's been to Israel several times, someone who's been studying the whole Middle East and the Israeli case, and someone who's seen, a thing or two in his life, what would you say is the thing that shocked you the most about the war in Gaza and the war against Hamas, or Hezbollah or these things? Like something that really kind of surprised you even?
About the war itself. Look, I think it has to be the 7th of October stuff I've seen. I've seen more than most Israelis. I've been, I guess, fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you look at it, to go to Glilot, to go to the base there and see some of the additional evidence. I've walked the ground down in the Gaza periphery. I think I knew about 7th of October before I did that, but then I didn't really understand it. And the depths of depravity and horror that Hamas went to on that day, I think, are underreported in the wider world. Most people don't understand just how bad it was. And if I describe to you some of the evidence that I've seen, it would probably get your channel banned because it is that horrific. Most of the people in the West don't understand that. And so when you have these idiots chanting for Hamas on the streets, I genuinely think they're idiots who don't understand what they're chanting for, because the levels of horror and I'd run out of words. Look, I'm getting hairs on the back of my arm standing up just talking about it as I think about it. It's I've managed to keep going for an hour flowing with conversation. I'm stuttering and staggering trying to talk about this because it's so appalling. That's the bit that shocked me the most.
Fair enough. I think you got us all as well. Andrew, it was a real honor and a pleasure having you here, and I really hope, by the way, whoever is listening right now, watching, go and check his Instagram. This man is like many men of war and people that came from the army. We're not that social media savvy when it comes to the influencers kind of life, but he does have a channel and he have a very important voice. I think most of the videos that you might have seen of him were probably circulating where people taking snippets of some of the interviews that he had, but he have his own account. Go and check it out. Go check his Instagram. And he also have a channel that he is being very active where he put his stuff. And how did you call that area? That was
on Substack.
Yes, that is
MrAndrewFox.substack.com.
Yes, I'm gonna put it right now on the screen here. Go and check him on Substack as well, guys. Check him on Instagram. Give him a follow, and also just thank you so much, man. We really appreciate you coming on our show here. It's been something we've been waiting for a long time. Actually, the last time we almost had you on the show, Khalifa had a car accident, if you remember.
Yeah.
And I sent you a message. You asked me like, "Hey mate, how's it going? Are we coming up tonight?" I said, "No, that shepherd just had a car accident." So.
Yeah, and go listen to him and follow him on the Brink. Brilliant podcast, and support him because he's doing one hell of a job. And thank you again for your service, for your time, for your insights. It was a pure pleasure talking to you, sir.
Well, thank you for giving me the time to talk to your audience. It's been great. I've really enjoyed it, and let's do it again sometime.
Amen.
Bless your soul.
Honors.